The flash hit my eyes before I even turned around, and for a moment, I forgot I was the one holding the damn camera. It was Chloe's night, of course. Gold balloons spelling out, "Congrats, si Chloe," hung above a rented dance floor, and Dad was showing off the champagne like he was the one who landed the promotion at some tech firm I couldn't pronounce. I was standing near the edge of the party tent, Nikon in hand, adjusting the ISO like a good little family ghost. They hadn't even asked me if I wanted to come. They asked if I could help. "You're good with that camera, right, Jake?" Mom said, with her voice syrupy sweet and sharpened with that tone that never gave you room to say no. "We're hiring a caterer already, and you know how expensive photographers are these days." I nodded, of course. I always do. 42 years old, and I still flinch when my father raises his voice, which he rarely does anymore, not because he's mellowed out, but because he doesn't need to. The silence between us is punishment enough. So there I was, invisible behind the lens, snapping pictures of cousins I hadn't seen in years and some strangers who looked at me like I was the hired help. No one even asked if I'd eaten. They were too busy clapping Chloe on the back, calling her the star, the pride of the family, our little miracle who made it big. All while I paced around the edges like some voyeur with a press pass to my own erasure. I saw Chloe laughing, her voice carrying across the lawn like she owned the damn world. That laugh, that high, cutting cackle, used to make me want to smash something when we were kids. It wasn't that she was cruel. She was just the kind of person who filled every room without trying, and if you weren't shining like she was, you may as well not exist. I remember when she got her acceptance letter to Berkeley, there was a whole cake, balloons, Dad even cried. When I got mine to the community college, Dad didn't even look up from his paper. They set up a toast for her right around sunset. Dad gave a speech about work ethic and making something of yourself, which was rich coming from a man who spent most of his retirement judging his kids like it was a full-time job. Mom was crying, dabbing her eyes with a cloth napkin. Chloe stood there, soaking it in, grinning like a celebrity. I kept the camera steady, pretending I didn't feel the heat of old bitterness climbing up my throat. What nobody saw, what nobody ever saw, was me, slipping away from the party for a moment, walking over to the gift table and placing down the box I had made. Handcrafted from walnut, polished smooth, with brass hinges I filed myself. Inside, a shadow box frame I had carved from the same wood. In the center, I'd burned a sentence into the back panel using a hot wire tip, "To the one who took everything and never looked back." No card. No name. Just that. I closed the box and walked away. I came back to the party, kept snapping, kept smiling like some poor bastard who'd lost his voice years ago and learned to live without it. I took photos of Chloe holding up a wine glass, her friends hooting like college kids. Photos of Mom grinning, her hand on Chloe's shoulder like a proud general. Photos of Dad not smiling, but nodding, approving, satisfied in a way I hadn't seen since Chloe hit 6 figures. The moment came later. Cake was cut. The music had slowed, and Mom called everyone over to the gift table, beaming. "Chloe, sweetheart, come open your presents," she called out like a damn pageant host. People crowded around with their iPhones, recording like it was the Oscars. Chloe laughed and opened a designer bag from someone at her job. Perfume from Aunt Liz. A framed group photo from college friends. Then she opened mine. At first, no one said anything. She pulled the lid off slowly, and I watched her face shift, eyes narrowing just slightly, mouth tightening. She lifted the frame, turned it in her hands. "Then read the back. Out loud. To the one who took everything and never looked back." The silence hit hard. No polite gasps. No fake laughs. Just this long, cold pause like the air got sucked out of the whole damn tent. Mom blinked fast, her mouth starting to form a smile that never came. Dad shifted his weight, looking at the box like it might explode. Chloe didn't move. She didn't say a word. She just looked at the frame, then at me. And I smiled. First real smile of the night. No one clapped. No one laughed. No one asked questions. And that was the moment I knew they all understood exactly what I'd said without saying anything at all. I should have felt petty. Or cruel. Or maybe ashamed. But all I felt was relief. Like I'd finally opened a window in a room that had been choking me for decades. And you know what? It's amazing how loud silence can be when the truth finally lands on the table. But that was only the beginning. Because once you say something like that, once you let it out, you can't ever take it back. And the storm doesn't wait long to come. When I was 8 years old, I won a spelling bee at my elementary school, standing on a stage in front of folding chairs filled with half-interested parents and a bored-looking principal who forgot my name halfway through the certificate presentation. I remember looking out into the crowd, squinting past the overhead lights, searching for two faces I didn't see, my mom and dad. They were at Chloe's ballet rehearsal that night, something about final practice before a big recital, and I walked home alone with my paper certificate folded in half inside my backpack. That was the first time I understood that being good at something didn't mean people would notice. Especially not in my house. The strange thing is, I didn't grow up resenting Chloe the way you might think. Not at first. She was loud and pretty and always wanted to perform on tables, in the kitchen, on the front lawn if the mood struck. And everyone loved it. Our parents beamed at her like she was made of stardust and miracles, and they'd clap like fools even when she messed up a line or sang off-key. Meanwhile, I'd bring home straight A's, quietly stack dishes, mow the lawn without being asked, and it was like I was background noise, part of the furniture. Jake's the easy one, Mom would say with a smile, like it was a compliment. But what it really meant was, Jake doesn't need anything from us, so we don't need to give him anything either. By the time I hit high school, I'd already learned how to disappear in plain sight. I was the one who drove Chloe to her early morning dance classes, the one who walked home from soccer practice while Dad sat through every one of Chloe's debate meets. I built things in the garage, little wooden boxes, model ships, clocks that barely ticked, but no one asked what I was doing out there. They just knew I wasn't causing trouble, and that was enough. Chloe, on the other hand, could set fire to the living room, and they'd ask if she was experimenting with something creative. Once, she crashed Dad's car backing out of the driveway while texting a friend, and Dad took her out for pancakes later that week because she was clearly stressed. I once got grounded for returning a library book late. Not because of the fine, but because, Jake, you should know better. Years passed. Chloe got accepted into Berkeley, and the whole house turned into a shrine. Her acceptance letter got framed. Literally framed. Hung in the hallway near the thermostat like a sacred document. I got into the local community college. Dad grunted. Mom asked if I was sure I didn't want to try again next year. I nodded. I always nodded. Always the helper. The background character in someone else's spotlight. And I carried that same energy into adulthood, which was probably my first real mistake. I never left town. I became a freelance woodworker, building tables and cabinets, and the occasional overpriced rustic centerpiece for rich folks with more money than personality. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Meanwhile, Chloe moved to San Francisco, took a marketing job, and every Christmas came home in a new car with a louder laugh and a new handbag worth more than my monthly rent. Mom would practically levitate when she walked in, fluttering around her like a teenage girl meeting a pop star. Dad would get quiet, sit a little straighter, and ask questions about the firm like he understood what marketing was. Then, one afternoon, I got the call from Mom about the promotion party. Not an invitation, mind you. A request. It would mean so much to Chloe if you could take the pictures, she said, her voice already halfway into guilt trip mode. You're so good with that camera, and we'd rather have someone we trust. I waited. Waited for her to say something about me coming as a guest, or if I wanted to bring someone, or hell, if I'd like to actually be in the photos this time. Nothing. Just instructions. We'll need you there early, to help set up. I almost said no. I had the word in my mouth, but I spit it out and said, sure, because that's what I do. I say yes. I swallow the little rejections like pills without water and pretend they don't scratch on the way down. The night of the party, I stood by the folding tables covered in white cloth, balancing my camera on my hip while watching Chloe hug everyone like a politician on the campaign trail. She looked good, I won't lie. Polished, confident, successful. But something in me recoiled every time someone said, "You must be so proud, Sandra. You raised a powerhouse." And Mom would beam, not even glancing in my direction. There was this moment, around the second hour, after the third round of toasts and second round of drinks, where someone tapped me on the shoulder. A family friend, I think. "You're Chloe's brother, right?" The quiet one. I nodded. He smiled like it was a compliment and said, "You've got a good eye. These pictures will turn out great." And then he walked away before I could answer. Have you ever been at a family event and felt like a stranger in your own story? Like the supporting character in someone else's memoir? I'd love to know, because I'm damn sure I'm not the only one who's spent their life doing the right thing and ending up invisible anyway. What burned wasn't the party. It wasn't the spotlight being somewhere else. It was the fact that they didn't even think I'd want to be part of it. They just assumed I'd help. That I was fine staying behind the camera, watching life happen from behind a lens like some underpaid wedding photographer with no plate at the table. And maybe that's the worst kind of pain, not being hated or shouted at, but being politely excluded. Lovingly sidelined. Like your existence is appreciated only when it serves someone else's celebration. But that night, for the first time in years, I didn't feel nothing. I felt something sharp and hard forming just beneath the surface, like a crack in cold glass. And that's when I decided I wouldn't stay silent anymore. Not forever. There's a certain kind of coldness that doesn't feel like cruelty, not in the obvious way, but more like a draft that sneaks in through old windows, brushing the back of your neck and making you shiver without quite knowing why. And that's the best way I can describe how it felt walking into that party, the one my parents threw with all the pomp of a wedding and the polish of a corporate gala, for my sister, of course, never for me. They'd rented out the big backyard of the Holbrook estate, the one that belongs to Dad's old friend who retired a millionaire off something boring like logistics, and the entire lawn had been transformed into a Pinterest dream, long white tables with linen covers, mason jars filled with fairy lights, even one of those stupid letterboards that said Boss Babe Energy only near the entrance, which I assume was Chloe's touch, or maybe Mom's, trying to seem like she understood her daughter's new world of hashtags and hustle culture. I showed up early like I was told, camera bag over my shoulder, dressed in dark slacks and a collared shirt, which was more effort than I usually made for anything these days. Nobody greeted me. Nobody thanked me for coming early. I walked straight into a tent of strangers barking instructions and checking off lists, and when I found Mom, she barely glanced up from the clipboard in her hand before handing me a lanyard that said event staff, in big block letters like I was the guy refilling the drink coolers. There was a DJ setting up near the far corner, already doing a sound check with remixed Taylor Swift that made my molars ache, and I noticed that they'd also set up a little photo booth area with props and hats. Probably thinking that's what photographers did now, made people wear oversized sunglasses and feather boas while pretending to be spontaneous. I asked Mom where she wanted me to set up for formal pictures, and she just waved her hand vaguely at a corner near the hedge and said, "Wherever there's light, sweetheart, just make sure Chloe looks good in them, okay?" That was the phrase that stuck with me for hours after "make sure Chloe looks good in them." Not a single word about me, or how I was doing, or even a mention of the work I put into helping her with her resume 3 years ago when she was trying to get into that firm. I remember sitting with her at my kitchen table, editing her cover letter while she played with her phone and whined about how boring it was. I didn't do it because I wanted thanks. I did it because I thought that's what family did. But now I see that in this family, what you do is only as valuable as how much it helps Chloe shine. Guests started pouring in around 6, all high fives and air kisses, and can you believe how fast she's climbing? While Chloe stood in the center of it all, wine glass in hand, soaking up every compliment like sunshine. She wore a black pantsuit, sleek and expensive-looking, with gold accents and shoes that probably cost more than I made last month. She saw me once through the crowd, gave a little wave, not warm, not cold, just functional, like acknowledging a barista she'd seen before but couldn't quite place. I watched people give her gifts, wrapped boxes, envelopes that were obviously filled with checks or gift cards. Someone handed her a gold pen engraved with her initials, and every time, she lit up like it was her birthday and graduation rolled into one. Meanwhile, I stood to the side, clicking photos, capturing moments I was not part of, documenting the love and pride that flowed so easily in her direction, but never quite made its way to mine. And I know what you might be thinking: why didn't I just walk away? Why didn't I refuse, or tell them to shove their lanyard and take their own damn pictures? And the truth is, I don't know. Maybe I'm just too conditioned to keep playing the role. Maybe I thought there was still a part of me hoping someone would notice me doing the right thing, like some kind of loyal dog waiting for a pat on the head. Or maybe I was waiting for the right moment to finally stop being the background character and say what I needed to say, loudly, clearly, in a way that could never be ignored again. That moment started taking shape as I watched Chloe open her arms to greet Aunt Janet, pulling her in for a kiss and shouting, "Can you believe it? I'm running my own team now." I remembered, suddenly and clearly, that when I took on my first big contract, custom cabinetry for a local hotel, nobody in my family even asked to see the finished product. I had to post it on Facebook just to pretend like it mattered to someone, and the only comment I got was from a high school friend I hadn't seen in 15 years. The bitterness sat in my chest like wet cement, heavy and unmovable, and I reached into my camera bag and ran my hand over the box I had hidden at the bottom. The gift. The one they didn't know about. The one I didn't wrap in shiny paper or top with a bow. The one that took me 16 hours to build from scratch, not counting the time I spent deciding what I wanted to say with it. It was walnut wood, dark and smooth, with a beveled edge and a glass front. Inside the frame, there was no photo. Just carved words on a black velvet backing, burned deep into the wood with a branding iron I'd made myself. Words that had sat in my head for years, unspoken, festering. To the one who took everything and never looked back. It didn't have her name on it. It didn't need to. I watched the crowd laugh and clink glasses. I watched Dad toast her with this proud little smirk, like he'd built her from scratch with his own 2 hands. And I waited. I waited for the moment when they'd all see it. When the mask would crack. When the celebration would stop being a parade and start becoming a reckoning. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about balance. About finally telling the truth in a language they couldn't ignore or talk over. And soon, very soon, that box would speak louder than I ever had. There's a moment, just before someone opens a gift, when their face softens into that smug, expectant smile, the one that says they're waiting to be delighted, waiting to be impressed, waiting to receive something that confirms what they already believe about themselves. That they are important, that they are celebrated, that they are adored. And Chloe wore that exact expression as she bent over the table, fingers curled under the edge of the lid, not even glancing at the name tag, because why? Would she? Of course the whole damn table was for her. Of course every box held another symbol of how special she was. The air had gotten thick by then, the kind of heavy you don't notice until you try to breathe deep and realize something's pressing down on your chest, something more than just humidity or the late summer heat. It was the weight of expectation, of tension you could almost taste, because I had positioned myself just close enough to see her reaction, but just far enough to pretend I wasn't watching too closely. I didn't want anyone to know it was from me, not at first. I wanted the gift to speak before I did, and I wanted their reactions to be real, not sanitized by politeness or spun by my presence. She pulled the lid off slowly, fingers grazing the velvet lining, and for a second, the light caught the polished walnut just right and made the surface gleam like glass. I watched her smile twitch, just slightly, not enough for the others to see it, but enough for me, because I've spent a lifetime reading her face in micro-movements, learning to recognize the tiny tics that mean discomfort, confusion, embarrassment. The kinds of emotions Chloe was never allowed to show publicly, not when she'd built her entire identity on confidence and command. She lifted the box and held it up so the people around her could see, which was perfect, exactly what I hoped for, because now all those grinning faces were leaning in with curiosity, looking for a clue, looking for the brand name or the luxury label, and instead finding nothing but a phrase, burned deep into the wood, blackened letters with no decoration or disguise. To the one who took everything and never looked back. She read it aloud, but not the way people read cards at parties, laughing or crying or hamming it up for the crowd. She read it like she was reading an obituary, like the words had pulled the ground out from under her, and she wasn't sure how to land. Her voice was quieter than usual, and for Chloe, quiet was foreign territory, an unfamiliar country she didn't know how to navigate. The room, if you could call that backyard tent a room, fell silent so fast it felt like a sound vacuum, like the world forgot how to breathe for just a few seconds. People started looking around, blinking, confused, maybe even worried that they'd missed a joke or a reference, and then their eyes slowly started drifting toward me. I didn't move. I didn't smirk or flinch or nod. I just kept holding my camera, like I was still doing my job, like I wasn't the one who just detonated a 30-year-old bomb in the middle of the celebration. Mom was the first to speak, her voice high-pitched and too cheerful, the kind of panic-sweet tone she used when things were spiraling, but she refused to let anyone see the cracks. Well, that's creative. Jake always had a unique sense of humor, didn't he? She said, trying to laugh, but it died in her throat when she turned and saw my face. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't joking, and suddenly the room knew it. Dad stood up straighter, like a sergeant preparing for battle, scanning the crowd like he expected someone to step in and break the tension. But nobody moved. Nobody knew what the hell to say. Chloe, for her part, didn't speak. She just stared at the box, then back at me, and in that moment, we both knew exactly what I meant. Because this wasn't new. This wasn't a surprise. This was the culmination of decades of small slights and quiet betrayals and years of being told to wait your turn when your turn was never coming. I had carved that box with my own hands, every inch of it shaped over hours in my garage, each plane sanded smooth until it felt like satin under my palms. I had chosen walnut because it was strong and dark, a wood that doesn't splinter easily, the kind of wood that holds its shape even under pressure. And when I burned those words into the back panel, I did it slowly, carefully, because I wanted the letters to last longer than the party, longer than the wine buzz and the plastic smiles. I wanted her to see them in her dreams. I didn't say anything as I turned and walked away from the crowd, camera still in hand, not looking back to see if anyone followed. I didn't need to. I knew I had finally, irreversibly, changed something in the air. The truth had landed, heavy and unmovable, and whether they liked it or not, it wasn't going away. Chloe didn't chase me. Mom didn't call out. Dad didn't storm over. They all stood there, frozen by the realization that for once, I had said something, and worse, that they had no script to handle it. And maybe it wasn't revenge. Maybe it wasn't justice. But it was honest. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous thing you can give someone as a gift. They didn't come after me right away, not when I left the party tent and walked across the lawn like I didn't have a single damn care in the world. Like I hadn't just dropped a hammer onto their perfect little evening and watched the ripples spread through every polite conversation and brittle smile. And for a minute, I thought maybe they'd just let it slide. Maybe they'd do what they always did and pretend the uncomfortable thing never happened, sweep it under the family rug like a stain that couldn't be scrubbed out, the kind they'd rather walk around than acknowledge. But no, not this time. I'd just made it to my car, the camera bag still slung across my shoulder and my keys already in hand, when I heard the footsteps fast, angry, heels clicking against the flagstone path like the sound of war drums. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Mom. Her walk gave her away before her voice ever did, that clipped rhythm that said she was holding back a scream but losing the fight fast. "Jake," she said, her voice tight and trembling, like she'd practiced the word a dozen times before letting it out. What the hell was that supposed to be? I turned slowly, not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I wasn't in a rush anymore. There was no more pretending, no more smiling through clenched teeth. I met her eyes and saw the panic there, the same panic I'd seen in her face when Dad's temper used to flare, and she'd scrambled to smooth it all over before the neighbors heard. That, I said, my voice steady in a way I didn't even recognize, was me telling the truth. Mom blinked like I'd slapped her. She took one step closer, then another, her hands twitching like she didn't know whether to hug me or slap the taste out of my mouth. "You embarrassed your sister in front of everyone," she said, whispering now, like the walls of the Holbrook estate might have ears. "You made her feel small on the one night she was supposed to feel proud." I didn't answer right away because there were too many things I could have said, and none of them would have made any damn difference. I could have told her how many times I'd felt small at my own dinner table, how often I'd sat through celebrations where my name wasn't mentioned, my face not in the photos, how I learned to hold a camera just so I could be useful. So I could at least be near the people who never really saw me. Instead, I just looked at her and said, maybe now she knows how I felt for the last 30 years. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Not immediately. Then, like a burst pipe, the words poured out: defensiveness, excuses, the usual cocktail of parental denial. "We've always loved you, Jake. You're the reliable one, the strong one. You never needed all the fuss. Chloe, she just needed more support, that's all. She's different." And there it was, the quiet admission that I had always known was buried under their compliments and dismissals, that everything they'd ever done had been filtered through the idea that Chloe needed the attention, the affection, the applause, while I was supposed to be the support beam that held up the damn roof. I could feel the crack forming in the glass between us, that invisible sheet of unspoken rules and family expectations that had always separated us. And I realized I wasn't sad about it breaking. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just felt tired. Bone-deep tired of carrying a load they never even acknowledged was on my back. "Tell her I didn't do it to hurt her," I said, sliding into the driver's seat and closing the door softly behind me. "Tell her I just wanted her to see." I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't need to. I pulled away from the estate slowly, my headlights washing over the carefully trimmed hedges and manicured lawn, like searchlights sweeping over a crime scene. Behind me, the party was still going, though quieter now, like someone had turned the volume down on the joy, replaced it with confusion and discomfort. I imagined Chloe still holding the box, staring at it like a puzzle she didn't know how to solve, wondering if this was the first time in her life someone had dared to see her without flattery or affection. When I got home, I didn't unpack the camera. I didn't look at the photos. I didn't even turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark for a while, letting the silence settle around me like dust. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel oppressive. It didn't feel like something was missing. I thought about the times I helped Chloe with her homework while Mom made dinner for her and never for me. I thought about the weekends I gave up to drive her to auditions, to recitals, to college visits. I remembered the way she used to cry when things didn't go her way, and how I always stepped in, always fixed things, always gave. And I remembered the day she got her first big promotion and forgot to call me. Completely forgot. I found out from Facebook. A caption under a photo of her holding a champagne flute, "To new beginnings and earned success." "Earned," she said. "Earned." I don't know what she'll do with that gift. Maybe she'll throw it out. Maybe she'll bury it in a closet somewhere and pretend it never happened. Or maybe, one night, years from now, she'll pull it out again, trace the letters with her fingertips, and wonder how she didn't see it coming. But one thing's for sure, it's hers now. And some things, once given, can't be returned. There's a specific kind of silence that settles in a house when you come back from something that changed you, not a silence born from peace or calm, but something colder and more uncertain, like the hush that falls before a thunderstorm finally breaks, except, in this case, I wasn't sure if the storm had already passed or if it was just beginning to brew behind me as I closed the front door and dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter, their clatter sounding way too loud in the stillness. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. The street lamps outside cast enough glow through the curtains for me to find my way to the living room, and I sat down on the couch like I was sinking into something I couldn't name. Not sadness exactly, and not satisfaction either, but something in between. Like I'd cracked a window in a house with no air for years and was finally getting a taste of oxygen, bitter, dusty, unfamiliar, but real. I didn't hear from anyone that night. Not Mom, not Dad, not Chloe, not even a stray text from a cousin or family friend trying to piece together what the hell had just happened. It was like I'd pulled a plug in the middle of the celebration and drained all the noise out of the room, and now everyone was left staring at the floor, pretending they hadn't heard the sucking sound of something leaving. The next morning, I didn't wake up angry. I didn't wake up triumphant either. I just made coffee, black and hot, the way I always did, and I sat at the table staring at the wall, realizing that for the first time in probably a decade, I didn't feel the need to brace for anything, no calls demanding favors. No guilt-laced requests wrapped in politeness, no subtle reminders that my job in the family was to be dependable, invisible, and never too loud. Instead, I pulled an old photo album from the bottom drawer of my bookshelf, one I hadn't touched in years, not because I'd forgotten about it, but because I knew exactly what I'd find inside, page after page of birthdays and holidays. Weddings and graduations, and almost none of them with me in them. I flipped through it slowly, page after page, watching the years scroll by like a highlight reel I hadn't starred in, occasionally spotting the back of my head or my arm reaching into a frame, holding a drink, holding someone else's coat, holding the damn camera. One page caught me off guard. It was Chloe's 10th birthday, the one where she got the Barbie dream house she'd been begging for, and there was a photo of her grinning next to the cake, arms stretched wide, eyes lit up like it was the best day of her life. Behind her, blurred and cropped halfway out of the frame, I was carrying a trash bag full of wrapping paper. That was the most visible I'd been in the whole album up to that point. I closed the book and sat in the stillness for a long time. Then, on some impulse I didn't entirely understand, I opened my laptop and started typing, not to anyone in particular, not for an audience, just for myself. The words came slowly at first, hesitant and raw, like they were checking to see if it was safe to come out after being buried so long. I didn't write about Chloe's party, or the gift, or even the way Mom's voice cracked when she asked me what the hell I was thinking. I wrote about the first time I realized I could disappear and no one would notice. I wrote about skipping prom because I didn't want to explain to anyone why I didn't have a date. I wrote about building a bookshelf for Chloe's dorm room when I couldn't afford textbooks of my own. I wrote about the Christmas they left me off the family newsletter, not because they forgot, but because you didn't really have any updates this year, right? The words piled up like bricks, building something I didn't even know I needed, a record, maybe, or a reckoning. I wasn't sure if I'd ever show it to anyone, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to pretend anymore. I wasn't going to smile through every slight like it didn't bleed. I wasn't going to keep carving gifts for people who only saw the wood and never the work. Later that afternoon, I sealed the photo album in a cardboard box and taped it shut. I wrote a short note and slipped it under the lid, not cruel, not bitter, just true. For when you finally want to see me. I didn't sign it. I addressed the box to my parents' house and left it on the porch for the mail carrier to pick up. No announcement. No warning. Just a piece of history delivered straight to the doorstep of people who had rewritten the past so many times they forgot who was left out of it. That night, I went for a walk. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs to small neighborhoods after dinner, when the dishes are done and the televisions hum behind closed blinds. I didn't bring my phone. I didn't check my messages. I just walked, hands in pockets, breathing the kind of deep, Steady breaths that feel like they're scraping something loose from inside your ribs. I knew things weren't over. Not really. Chloe would call. Eventually. Dad might write an email, stiff and short and half-hearted, asking for an explanation without ever offering an apology. Mom would probably cry. She always did. But I wouldn't be the one bending first this time. I wouldn't be the one patching the cracks in the glass. Some things don't need to be fixed. Some things just need to be seen for what they are, fractured, flawed, and finally honest. And that, I realized, might be the closest thing to freedom I'd ever had. A week passed before I heard anything, and for 7 long days the silence stretched out between me and the rest of my family like a canyon carved by decades of things left unsaid. 1,000 small cuts and quiet slights finally ripping wide open after a single act of honesty that none of them had the tools to deal with. I didn't reach out first, not this time. I spent those days working in my shop, hands covered in sawdust and varnish, surrounded by the smell of wood and metal and quiet labor, the kind that doesn't need applause or a spotlight to mean something. I didn't talk about the party to anyone. I didn't check social media. I didn't answer the phone when it rang with familiar numbers. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing silence on purpose, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was finally letting them sit in it and feel how heavy it gets when no one's holding the weight for them anymore. It was late Wednesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. I didn't pick up the first time it rang, but curiosity finally won out around midnight when the house was dark and the sound of my ceiling fan was the only thing reminding me I was still tethered to the world. I listened to the message in the dark, sitting on the edge of my bed, and it was Mom's voice, thin, tear-stretched, stumbling through a mixture of guilt and confusion, like someone trying to apologize without actually admitting they were wrong. "I don't know who you are anymore," she said, and that line hit me harder than I expected, not because it hurt, but because it told me everything I needed to know about how little she'd ever really seen me in the first place. If she didn't recognize me now, maybe that was because she'd spent so many years loving an image of me that never really existed, one she could rely on, one who didn't ask for anything. One who smiled on command and took the pictures and never handed over the lens. I didn't call her back. Not yet. Instead, I went to the porch that next morning and found a small box sitting there, brown paper wrapping slightly damp from the dew, no return address, but familiar handwriting scrawled across the label. I carried it inside with both hands like it was fragile, even though I already knew what it would be the moment I saw the handwriting. It was from her mom, of course. Inside the box, wrapped in soft tissue, was my old baby blanket, faded blue with a corner missing, frayed from years of being dragged across tile floors and backyard grass. It was the one thing I'd always assumed had been tossed out or lost in some garage purge, but apparently she'd kept it. And now, without a note or a word, she was giving it back to me like a peace offering, or maybe a guilt relic, hoping it would make me soften or smile or feel something tender again. But I didn't. I held it in my hands for a minute, fingers tracing the edge where the fabric had started to come apart, and I thought about how something so small could survive years of being forgotten in a box, while I, the living, breathing son, couldn't even get a photo in the damn album. I left the blanket on a park bench later that afternoon, tucked carefully beneath the armrest, figuring someone else's kid might need it more than I ever did. I walked away and didn't look back. On Friday, I finally saw Chloe's post, the one with all the pictures from the party. Or rather, some of the pictures. Not mine. Not a single one of the shots I took made it into the carousel she uploaded, even though I'd spent hours capturing moments in perfect lighting, framing every image with care. Instead, she used selfies and grainy iPhone photos, group shots taken by party guests, none of which included me, naturally. The caption was long, full of gratitude for everyone who made the night so special, with a special thank you to the people who showed up with love. There was no mention of me, not even a footnote. And I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not angry or even disappointed, Just a tired laugh, the kind that comes when you've already grieved something and now it's just absurd. Because in her world, in their world, the story had already been rewritten. The night was beautiful, the party was perfect, and my role had been erased as neatly and cleanly as a bad memory. But there's a difference now. I wasn't invisible because they ignored me. I was invisible because I walked away. That same evening, my phone rang again, and this time, I picked up. Chloe's name flashed on the screen, and for a second I considered letting it go to voicemail again, but something inside me said, no, not this time. I answered, and there was silence on the other end before her voice broke through, quieter than I remembered, less sure of itself. Can we talk? She said. Without the noise. I didn't say yes. Not right away. I let the silence stretch just a little longer than was polite, and in that space, I knew she felt it, the shift, the gap, the new balance between us. And then I said, yeah. But this time, I talk first. Because the thing about fallout is that it clears the air. It's destructive, yes, and it leaves marks that don't fade quickly, but it also strips away everything false, everything decorative, until you're left with just the bones of the truth. And the truth is, I was done being their shadow. I was ready to be heard even if they didn't like what I had to say. The diner where we met wasn't anything special, one of those roadside spots with cracked leather booths and faded photos of menu items taped to the window, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and overcooked bacon, but it was quiet and unassuming and, most importantly, far enough away from our parents' house that neither of us had to pretend we were still playing nice under their roof. I got there first, sat near the back where the light came in soft through the blinds, casting long shadows across the Formica table, and I waited with a calm that felt unfamiliar, not because I wasn't nervous, but because the usual anxiety that came with family confrontation had finally burned itself out, leaving only this strange kind of stillness in its place. Chloe arrived 10 minutes late, of course, looking polished as ever in a cream blazer and jeans that probably cost more than my entire month's grocery bill, and for a second, I saw her hesitate at the door, scanning the place like she was unsure this was the right kind of spot for this kind of conversation. But she walked over without making a scene, slid into the booth across from me, and didn't reach for a hug or even a handshake. Just folded her hands on the table and stared at me like she was trying to read a page she'd never seen before in a book she thought she'd already finished. Neither of us spoke for almost a full minute. The waitress came by, and we both ordered coffee, nothing else. No food, no small talk, just caffeine and silence. Two siblings staring at each other over a canyon built from decades of lopsided love and misplaced expectations. Finally, she broke the quiet. "What did you want from me?" she asked, and her voice wasn't sharp or defensive, just tired, like someone who'd run out of ways to deflect and was finally ready to listen, even if she wasn't ready to agree. What was that gift supposed to mean? I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't see the golden child or the family darling or the woman who never had to fight for the spotlight. I saw someone a little lost, a little wounded, maybe even scared that the one person who had always been predictable and solid had finally turned into something she couldn't categorize. I took a sip of coffee, bitter and lukewarm, and then I answered, slowly, carefully, making sure every word landed exactly where I wanted it to. "It wasn't about the box," I said. "It wasn't about embarrassing you or ruining your moment. It was about saying something I should have said a long time ago, something I didn't even know how to say until I stopped trying to be part of the celebration and realized I'd never really been invited in the first place." She flinched at that, just slightly, and I could see the guilt flicker behind her eyes. Maybe she hadn't meant to exclude me all these years. Maybe it wasn't intentional. But intent doesn't erase impact. Not when you've been living under it for most of your life. I spent years showing up, I continued, my voice steady now, stronger than I expected it to be. Not just physically, not just to parties or birthdays or whatever, but emotionally. I showed up. I helped. I stayed quiet. I played my role. And every time I did, It felt like I was being handed another invisible job. Support your sister, support the family, smile, nod, blend in. And the thing is, I never asked for the spotlight. I just wanted to be seen. Chloe looked down at her hands, twisting a napkin between her fingers like she needed something to do to keep from unraveling. I didn't know, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize it felt that way. That's the problem, I said. No one ever did. Because I didn't let them. Because I thought being good meant being quiet. And maybe it does in some families. But it damn near broke me. We sat there in silence for a while after that, letting the weight of it all settle between us, the kind of silence that feels earned, not awkward. Outside, cars passed by in steady streams, people going about their lives with no idea that two siblings inside a no-name diner were finally breaking open a truth that had been waiting far too long to be spoken. Eventually, she asked if she could see the box again, the one I gave her. I told her it wasn't mine to show anymore. She owned it now. What she did with it was up to her. Keep it, burn it, bury it in a drawer somewhere. But she couldn't unsee it, and that was the whole point. Later that evening, after I got home, I found a package waiting for me. No note, no explanation, just a manila envelope with my name on it, and inside, the family photo from Mom's hallway. The one taken back when Chloe was graduating high school, the one where we all stood together on the front lawn in our Sunday best. Except now, there was something missing. I had cut myself out of it. Clean, precise, and deliberate. My outline gone. Just a gap where I used to be. And maybe it was petty. Maybe it was childish. Or maybe it was the most honest thing I'd ever done. Because after all those years of smiling in the background, I was done being part of a picture where I never really belonged. Some gifts come in boxes. Some come in silence. And some come when you finally decide that disappearing is only tragic when someone notices you're gone. But when no one does, that's not tragedy. That's just truth.